So, why does microeconomics ruin politics? Let's say we've got a king, a head of government, whether democratic or a king, doesn't matter, and they've got two policies: full employment and clean air. These are their responsibilities to their subjects, to their people. If it was a democratic government, they've gone to the election promising full employment and clean air. And to achieve this goal of clean air, the government decides they're going to reduce the emissions of cars. So they're going to find some way to make cars pump out less toxic chemicals in their exhaust. And so they set up their rules, they set up their requirements, and tell the car companies that they have to put some sort of device into their cars to reduce the emissions to a certain extent, whatever that might be. And this is going to cost. Whatever this device is, we could say in reality, it's a catalytic converter. This has a price, and the car companies, of course, have to pay that price to install it, to buy it and install it in their cars. And they have to pass this on to the consumers. The price of a car is going to go up. But what if the car companies come to the government and scare them? They say, if you do this, the price of cars is going to go up. Less people are going to buy our cars. And so we're going to have to fire people. Because our sales go down, we're going to have to get rid of workers. Jobs are going to be lost. And the government starts to worry because they think, our other policy, our other promise was full employment. But in trying to achieve clean air, we're going to cause people to get fired, jobs to disappear in these car companies. And so because of this pressure from the car companies and perhaps the unions of the workers if they're on side with the car companies, but most of all because the government agrees with this logic that their clean air policy is at odds, is going to harm their full employment policy, so that this pressure actually works, the government caves in and they say we can't do this because it's going to cost jobs. This would be a mistake because the total income of the population hasn't changed. They're just going to have to pay more of it for these emissions reductions devices, which means they have to pay less of it for some other good. They have to buy more of these, which abstractly could be called the good clean air. They want to spend more of their income on that, which means they have to spend less somewhere else. So let's say these price increases do hurt sales and jobs are lost at the car manufacturers. Well, as part of this process, where sales for the cars have gone down, the production of the catalytic converters has gone up, and they need more workers to produce all these catalytic converters because all cars are now required to have them that weren't being produced before. Maybe it works out so cleanly, but probably not, because all the people who aren't buying a car anymore, those fewer car sales, will mean the whole amount of money being spent on cars is less. And so the jobs created by the companies producing the catalytic converters are less than the jobs lost by the car companies. But this by definition means that all the people who now aren't buying cars have free income to spend on something else. So let's say that their second preference were new computers. And now because of the price changes, the relative price changes, cars have gotten relatively more expensive, which means that even though computers haven't changed, they've gotten relatively cheaper against cars. All those people with the free income from not buying a car now want to buy a computer instead. And if they spent all their income freed up from not buying cars on computers, then the rest of the employment lost here would be needed here. And so the government would make a mistake thinking that one of these things has anything to do with the other. And that's because one of these things is a macroeconomic issue and one of them is a microeconomic issue. Clean air is a microeconomic issue because all that happens is income is redistributed from one place to another. To make the point, let's imagine there was a shop that sold catalytic converters. And these were things that car owners themselves could just go and buy from this shop and just screw onto their car. Easy. Because their preference is for clean air And just like any other consumer preference, they as an individual go and buy this product, this good, clean air, in the form of a catalytic converter to put on their car. How would they do this? Well, let's return to our original employment with the computers and car production. When people begin to buy the catalytic converters, spend their income there, it means they're not spending it somewhere else, on computers, for example. But the employment that's lost by computer production because the sales drop is recovered in the production of catalytic converters. And so a macroeconomic decision has been made on the part of individual consumers to redirect their income to create employment in one area and destroy it in another. But clean air isn't a consumer good, because there's a problem, like many public goods, is that if everyone doesn't do it, it doesn't help anyone really. You can go and buy a catalytic converter and add it to your car, but if you're the only one that does it, you're still breathing in the fumes of everyone else. And you've had to pay, but get no benefit from it. So it's one of those preferences that has to be executed on collectively. And like many things, the state is the one that can do that. So let's say the population have this preference, clean air, but knowing that none of them individually are going to make the first move, buy something, pay the money for a catalytic converter, giving up a new computer without knowing if it's actually going to bring any benefit, if buying this is going to satisfy their preference for clean air. So they all vote for a government that will force all cars to run with catalytic converters. In this scenario then, let's imagine everyone who owns a car wants this clean air. They just don't want to take this risk of being the first, so they all are happy to pay for the price for it. Then just as in this scenario with the individual consumer choice, they're redirecting employment from computers to the production of catalytic converters. And no employment is lost here because they pay the higher prices. If the government thinks microeconomically, it turns itself into a lobbyist for particular sectors. Because if the government understands the difference between a microeconomic and a macroeconomic policy, it understands that one of these will never harm the other. The tools that are necessary to complete full employment, to maintain full employment, for example, the macroeconomic tools, like the interest rate, like fiscal stimulus, are different from the tools needed to complete this microeconomic policy. They're never at odds with each other. A microeconomic policy is, like I said, a redistribution of income according to, in principle, consumer preferences. This could be at odds with other consumer preferences, like maybe a small part of the population that didn't vote for this government doesn't want to have to pay this price. But then only those two things are at odds, those two preferences for clean air or not to have clean air, because they're trying to redirect income in two different ways. But this is not at odds with full employment. But if the government listens to the microeconomic interests of a particular industry, but that industry portrays its microeconomic interests as macroeconomic interests, for example, confuses job losses in a particular sector with an absolute loss of jobs, an absolute creation of unemployment in the economy, then the government could start to act like a lobbyist, protecting the interests of this sector and sabotaging, not carrying out, the microeconomic policy that, for example, it took to an election, that is what the population or the majority of the population want.